Hello, welcome back to TSC Talks, the podcast where we talk about tuberous sclerosis complex and other related issues. My name is Jill Woodworth, and I am your host. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today on the podcast, I have a phenomenal TSC mom, Heather Little, who's here to share the experience of TSC in the life of her daughter. Heather lives in Texas, and her story and experience with her daughter really stretches across many of the experiences that are typical to tuberous sclerosis. However, it seems as if she was presented with challenge after challenge, though I do know many people are. I can speak personally to attest to that. Challenge after challenge, just when you think that you've got one thing knocked, another issue arises. So she's brilliant at outlining these, and I've broken it down into chapters on the actual podcast. Hopefully it'll work out the way I'm planning, because I'm recording this intro prior to doing this, which is probably going to, hopefully it'll work. So I'm not going to go into detail about that, except to say that we start with diagnosis, of course, and move on to infantile spasms and seizures, brain surgery, school issues, behavioral issues. We talk about family impact in the life of her son, her own personal struggles with managing the chronic stress related to this condition, which will pull you and push you in ways you may never have anticipated. Heather's gives us a very honest look at this, as well as what she needed to do to get herself on the beam and to be there and show up as she needed to care for her daughter. Heather's brave, articulate, just an amazing individual, and I really am honored to have her as a guest and to have had her on the podcast. I'm not going to go into much more detail. We wrap it up with her giving some really great themes of hope, some recommendations to those receiving a new diagnosis, as well as what she's doing currently in her life as far as personal projects. So, without further ado, thank you, Heather, so much for being my guest on TSC Talks. I hope you enjoy this, or at least find some information that is helpful to you, feel hopeful, and also inspired by Heather's strength. So, without further ado, take it away, Heather.
I have Heather Little. Thanks for being on, Heather, and talking to me about your experience with tuberous sclerosis complex. Why don't you just start and tell me a little bit about how you got involved with tuberous sclerosis and the diagnosis, first impressions, that kind of thing, a little history, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Heather Little, and I have two kids. I have an 11-year-old son. He does not have tuberous sclerosis. And then I have a 9-year-old daughter who does. And I had never heard of TS, as most people haven't, until my daughter's diagnosis. And hers, I don't know how much you want me to get into the diagnosis piece of it, but she was,
yeah, you can tell me.
So she was easy, long, but uncomplicated home birth. And really no issues with that, other than like around 2 weeks old, she just started seeming really colicky, but it was just very, very extreme. Like there was no calming her basically ever. Even looking back in hindsight, any signs of actual seizures then, I think probably that was just the precursor to things starting to gear up in her brain. And when she was about 3.5 months old, she started having, like, her arms would just jerk out. And this was during the process that this happened actually when I was traveling across the country to see my nephew being born. And so I was traveling with a 2-year-old and a new baby by myself. And when this was happening, and I didn't really know what it was.
But you knew it was something.
I knew it was something because I knew she couldn't control it. I'd try to hold her arm down and I still feel it going. And I remember thinking to myself, it looked like moral reflex, you know, when you like kind of turn a baby down, like a newborn baby down, their arms fling out. But I knew she was too old for that. And, she, you know, that reflex had since gone away because she's old enough, and it just kind of
Right.
I knew something wasn't right, and it actually did it in the middle of the night when she had woken up to nurse. And I got on Google, as many people do.
All do.
I wasn't home. I was in Nevada, and at the time I was in Illinois, so I couldn't go to the doctor or anything. And so I got on Google, and actually, just the way that I searched, I think, led me to what I needed, because I actually typed in infant and arm spasms because I didn't know what else to call it. And of course, so then that brought up infantile spasms and videos from the Tuberous Sclerosis Alliance. And I watched those videos, and I just knew instantly, because hers were really obvious. I know some kids aren't. Hers were really, really obvious. Yeah, I kind of tell people, like, that's the day that I died.
I hear you. I can still remember exactly where I was when I saw the infantile spasms starting with my oldest.
Right.
Yeah.
I spent the day trying to, and I mean, I feel like I'm reborn in a sense, and I'm a new person, but the old me, like, died that day.
That's really good, because that's so true.
Yeah, so we made it our way home. Of course, everything online said videotape it, so they take you seriously, and I did, and I showed it to her doctor, and thankfully we had an amazing pediatrician at the time.
Oh, that's so good.
Who instantly got us a room at the Children's Hospital in Peoria, Illinois, and yeah, we spent a week there running all of the tests that they do, and found out that she had tuberous sclerosis. That's actually the last diagnosis that they gave us. I was pretty certain she had infantile spasms just because hers were so clear and obvious and tended to happen upon waking. All the signs of what they say IS looks like. I was pretty certain with that. And they diagnosed that pretty quickly within a day of being in the hospital. So of course then they found out she had a heart arrhythmia that had not shown up at earlier well checks. And
was it Wolf Parkinson White by any chance?
No. Well, they never said that to us. We never really had any major issues with her arrhythmia. She had bradycardia actually when she was little. And they were, and a little bit of like, arrhythmia, additional beats, things like that, but it was nothing that was ever really a problem when she was a baby or when she was younger. Out of nowhere, it ended up getting bad. And when she was 5, we had to go in and do an ablation to fix her arrhythmia, because then she got tachycardia, and it just started kind of getting out of control at that point. And so we had to, we'd always told people like, yeah, she's got an arrhythmia, but it's fine. It's no problem. It doesn't change when she has a seizure. It's all okay. And then we had just gone in for a routine cardiology appointment, and that's when they're like, oh no, in 2 weeks we need to go deal with this.
Oh boy. One more thing, right? Yeah. Now, did she have rhabdos?
She did. She had 2. The interesting thing is she had 2 down in the bottom of her ventricles. They weren't affecting blood flow. But actually those were not the areas that they had to go in and ablate. And so, I think it's interesting. They're finding that like, okay, there are these tumors, but there's more going on than just the tumors, because sometimes whether in the heart or the brain or whatever, it's not even directly the tumors necessarily where like the electrical mishap is going on. So she still has her rhabdos down in the bottom of her heart, and they're not causing any problems. And there was just some other random place that was sending off weird signals in her heart. They had to go ablate out.
I see.
And then, it was successful, but
that's good.
Yeah. So she was diagnosed on her 4-month-old birthday in the hospital with tuberous sclerosis. And, there was a lot of waiting around. They didn't tell us. They didn't tell us right away. I think the neurologist, if I'm totally honest, I think he was like trying to like not be around, hoping someone else would tell us. Because we're sitting around waiting and waiting and waiting. And we already knew she had infantile spasms, and someone had mentioned TS in passing, but like I could only deal with the one thing at a time.
For sure.
I couldn't fathom like genetic disorders and tons of tumors and like other organ systems being affected. Like at the time I was like, okay, I'm just dealing with seizures right now. So finally he came in and he was like, oh, so I assume they told you. And we're like, told us what? And you could just see his face drop like, oh, I got to deal with this. And so like he was trying to avoid it, which was interesting. And so he sat down and told us, and yeah.
So that's where it's a lot to take in that moment, especially if, like you said, you've already had the infantile spasms and accepted that. Now this
is just one thing after, it was like we went in, we found out about that, then we found out about her heart, so then they found out about her skin. And then they told us, she's not just having seizures, but she's had too many tumors in her brain for us to count them. And she has a genetic disorder. And one punch in the gut after another, like every day, it was just more bad news for a solid week.
Yeah. So were you able to get the infantile spasms under control? And
yeah, we were. So, that's another interesting thing. They talked about, both Axar gel and vigabatrin. They talked about both of those options when we were in there. But at the time, the neurologists there were still very, honestly, afraid of vigabatrin and felt that the potential side effects of that were worse than ACTH, which I still find so laughable.
Yes, I agree.
Fear of the unknown, right? Because they've been using ACTH for so long. They put her on ACTH, Topamax. Well, I guess just to start, ACTH and Topamax. Mm-hmm. And they did that for, and it stopped them immediately. So, obviously she got quite large.
Yeah.
And, that was kind of one of my first things I dealt with socially, because she was so big and she was exclusively breastfed, and I'm not saying that like judgment is okay for anyone, however they feed their baby. I'm just saying like I would go places and it was like people were giving me looks like I was feeding my 4-month-old, cheeseburgers or something. You know what I mean? Like, and Mountain Dew or something. They were giving me these looks.
There's just never any pleasing everybody. And they wouldn't say anything, but I would get these very, very judgmental looks, and I just wanted to tell them, like, this is nothing but steroid and breast milk. Like, that's all this is, And, she, at her heaviest, she was 25 inches long and 22 pounds. Wow.
Which is,
I'm trying to remember the baby days and put that in perspective, but that sounds
my brother was 23 inches long at birth,
Yeah.
And only 8-something pounds. So yeah,
right.
she was very short and very stunted her height growth while she was on it. And then she just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So
how
her
long
growth
did she?
Chart looked very odd. It's like plateaued out and then went, like stair stepped. It was not like up and to the right like most.
But that was the steroids, most
right.
likely. Yeah. That's tough. I mean, to have all this and then to have the treatment make your daughter physically look different.
Right.
From a very early age. That's tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it worked. The ACTH gel.
It did. Of course, then, you can't stay on that long term.
Right.
So they weaned her off of it, and 3 weeks after they weaned her off of it, around 9 months old, I guess, by the time she had totally weaned off of it, and then like 3 weeks of like, she was just on the Topamax, and then, they started back up. And we knew that was a possibility, so they had like the vigabatrin paperwork and all of that ready to go. And so I was actually traveling at the time and not home, but they were real good about getting it shipped to the place that I was and getting her started on it. From the first dose, of her being on vigabatrin, it stops them immediately.
Yeah, that was hard.
They never warned, like, I love actually that drug. It's been a lifesaver for my daughter, but no one warned us. And I think, this goes into everything having to do with the behavioral pieces of TS. They were so concerned about the peripheral vision issues.
Right.
No one ever even mentioned to me.
Peripheral vision? My kids got to stop having these seizures. I don't care at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because I was like, I'd rather my kids be able to learn and have less of an intellectual disability than have a little bit of peripheral vision loss. Even if that's 100% guarantee it's going to happen.
It's kind of a triage type. Yeah. Yeah. So.
And but the thing that no one, and I, found this to be very, very